On October 18, 1992, a 23-year-old girl disappeared from inside her home, leaving behind an overwhelming number of questions and mysteries. Security cameras recorded her entering her house at 12:00 p.m., and she never left. Nothing unusual happened inside or outside the house. But the shocking and extremely strange part is that the same girl, without ever leaving her home, was recorded by security cameras returning to the house at 2:00 p.m. This means that within 2 hours, she entered the house twice without ever leaving. An astonishing number of crimes and mysteries beyond comprehension. Let's assume that every mystery has a secret key, and in this story, the key words are severe personality disorder, Aztec legend, the appearance and manifestation of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Today, I will tell you about a series of strange crimes, all committed by one person. Every crime he committed was aimed at fulfilling an ancient legend that would allow him to transfer from one body to another. When he was finally exposed and his plan failed, he remained silent and refused to say a single word. However, after he and all the prisoners with him saw Jesus Christ appear before them, he repented and confessed everything. By the way, this story didn't happen 2,000 years ago. It happened just a few years ago. The things I told you about, the ones that seem strange and illogical, are all true. They all really happened? When you hear this story in order and follow its details step by step, you will understand everything, and you will be shocked by the sheer amount of truth hidden within it. On July 26, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts, a 16-year-old girl left the hotel she was staying at around 6 a.m. to go for a run in the green fields surrounding the town. As she was running, a dog suddenly appeared in front of her, circling around and barking furiously. She quickly realized that she needed to follow the dog to understand the reason behind its strange behavior. She did exactly that and ended up in an empty, open field. There, she saw something completely unexpected: a rotting, decomposed corpse. It was terrifying and disgusting. The girl immediately contacted the police and reported the location of the body. As soon as the police arrived, they launched an investigation. But the information they uncovered was extremely strange and illogical. The first thing you need to know is that Provincetown is a tourist town, and at that time, its population was no more than 500 people. The town was designed for relaxation and recreation, the last place you would expect such a horrific crime to take place. The last recorded murder in this town had happened before World War II, meaning before 1945. So, the discovery of a body in this town, especially in the condition it was found in, was extremely strange. But the mystery didn't stop there. The body belonged to a large-built woman with red hair. Beneath her body, there was a large towel similar to the ones used at the beach. It might not sound logical, but from the way she was positioned, it seemed like she had been lying there, resting, before the killer arrived and took her life. Despite the body being decomposed and the crime having occurred more than 2 weeks prior, the corpse was still relatively intact with no visible signs of violence. This led to 3 possible explanations. The killer may have drugged her before committing the crime. She may have been asleep when the killer arrived. She might have known the killer, which is why she didn't resist and never expected him to harm her. Another strange detail noticed by investigators was the way she had died and the position of her body. As for the cause of death, it was completely unclear. The investigators couldn't determine exactly how she had been killed. There were 4 possible causes of death. Strangulation, because there were some wounds on her neck, slashing, since the victim's throat had been cut, and her head was nearly severed from her body. Internal bleeding in the head, as there was a large wound and bruise on the back of her skull, suggesting the killer had struck her with a heavy tool, like a pickaxe. Bleeding to death because her right arm was severed at the elbow, and her left hand was completely cut off. You'll soon understand why every detail matters. But the most important thing to know is this. Through advanced forensic examination, investigators discovered that the victim had bled to death, as the amount of clotted blood in her body was extremely low. It was as if the killer had drained her corpse of blood. But this raised a chilling question. Where was all the victim's blood? There were no visible traces of blood at the crime scene. The entire town was thoroughly searched, yet no evidence of the crime was found anywhere. In the end, in 1974, investigators reached the following conclusions. The victim's identity was unknown, so they named her the Lady of the Dunes. Since her body was found in a desert-like area surrounded by small hills, the cause of death remained unclear due to severe decomposition. Even the crime scene was unknown, as it was evident that the killer had moved the body to that location after killing her somewhere else. The body was placed calmly and carefully, as if the killer intended for the police to reach only cryptic and mysterious conclusions. The investigators were at a dead end with this crime. All suspicions pointed to the fact that the perpetrator was a serial killer, someone intelligent, fully aware of what he was doing, and managing the crime scene with absolute calm, brilliance, and precision. On top of that, he had the ability to erase all evidence, meaning they were dealing with someone far from ordinary, not a first-time killer. One last detail I want to share about this crime is that the victim was found wearing only a swimsuit. Her clothes were missing. Before we move on to the next crime, you need to know that for 50 years, no one was able to identify who this girl was or how the crime happened. 12 years after the crime, a second, even stranger crime occurred. On May 31st, 1986, a 6-year-old girl named Michelle was swimming in the pool at her home in Maryland. She had been in full view of her father, Carl, and everything seemed normal. However, the father went inside for about half an hour, and when he came out, he couldn't find his daughter. The father searched everywhere, but there was no trace of the girl. They contacted the police and reported her disappearance. Search operations began, but the police achieved no results. This incident involved Carl Dorr, the girl's father, who lost his mind and suffered a mental and nervous breakdown. After 3 months of medical care, the father recovered. As soon as he regained his health and well-being, he confessed that he had kidnapped his daughter. But how could he have kidnapped his daughter when she was with him in the same house? He told them that during the week of the girl's disappearance, he and his wife had separated due to the pressure he was under. He decided to kill his daughter. He took her to an empty area, killed her there, and threw her into a river. But where is this empty area? And where is this river you're talking about? The entire city has no river. He told them, I don't know, but that's what happened. However, just 1 month after this confession, the father retracted his statement and told them, everything I told you is untrue. This matter created a significant problem for the investigators. The search and investigation were halted for a whole month, with all the focus on the father as the prime suspect in his daughter's murder. However, when the father recanted his confession, the case took a sharp turn, becoming a complex puzzle. After a month-long break in the investigation, it would be practically impossible to locate the body and any potential evidence. The real perpetrator had ample time to cover their tracks. Tragically, the child disappeared, and the case was filed as a missing person case with an unknown perpetrator. Mystery shrouded the case, and everyone was convinced that the father was the culprit. Despite his illogical and inconsistent confession, he claims to have thrown her into a river, even though the city they lived in had no river. Nevertheless, he remained the sole suspect. Another person was investigated, a simple gardener named Hadden Clark. He resided temporarily with his brother and had no prior criminal record. He was arrested and interrogated because he knew the girl, Michelle. He was seen in their neighborhood, greeting her and playfully interacting with her. He was known to be a kind and likable person. regarding the girl's disappearance, even though this man appeared calm and kind. Investigator noted that he showed no signs of being affected by her absence. This led them to suspect he might be the type of person who kidnaps children without showing any outward signs. They investigated him, but after the interrogation, there was no evidence to confirm his guilt. As a result, he was acquitted, and his part in the story ended there. Now, my dear sir, let's leave this story and return to the first disappearance case I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which occurred on October 18, 1992, when a 23-year-old girl vanished from her home. Security cameras captured her entering the house twice. Even though she never left, the girl's name was Laura Hotelling, a Harvard University graduate who lived with her mother. As I told you, she disappeared from inside her own home. When investigators reviewed the camera footage or woolen fabrics, Laura's pillowcase was very coarse and woven, and no fingerprints were found on it during the initial house inspection. Consequently, investigators had assumed Laura had run away from home and was not kidnapped. They concluded she wasn't kidnapped or killed, she escaped the house in some deliberate way. Happened. My friend sewn into Laura's pillow was a small plastic tag with leather edges, displaying the manufacturer's name and specifications. On this tag, investigators discovered a partial foreign fingerprint. They identified the fingerprint in the lab purely by chance after finding the blood stain and sending the pillow for analysis. While examining the blood, they exposed the pillow to ultraviolet light, revealing the hidden fingerprint. This breakthrough unraveled the entire case and unmasked the killer. They discovered a fingerprint on this small part of the pillow. They collected the fingerprint and, upon cross-referencing it with forensic records, identified the killer. The shocking twist was that the killer was Hadden Clark, the simple gardener I mentioned in the previous crime. Over the years, they uncovered that this seemingly ordinary man harbored a story and tragedies unimaginable to the human Mindel, tracing back to his family. When Hadden Clark was arrested, he did not confess to anything. Throughout all interrogations, he remained silent, uttering not a single word. He stayed in this state for 8 months. The problem was that investigators knew he had kidnapped and killed Laura, but they couldn't prove how, and they had no information about the crime except Clark's fingerprint. Not only that, over those 8 months, 14 officers interrogated him, and all reported the same thing throughout the entire interrogation period. We never heard his voice. Initially, he was held in a solitary confinement cell with no belongings, but there was no interaction, not even a word. They even deprived him of food at times, hoping he'd at least ask to eat, but he never reacted, moved from his spot, or requested anything. They placed another inmate with him for 2 weeks, but Clark didn't speak a word or communicate at all. Because of this, they decided to transfer him to a shared cell to force interaction with others there. But he still didn't interact with anyone. He was referred to a medical evaluation committee, yet even with them, he remained unresponsive. All indicators were negative. Logically, how can you diagnose someone who doesn't speak or react? The situation dragged on this way for 8 months until he finally broke down completely, and the reason was a white teddy bear brought into the interrogation room, which literally shattered him. As we said, Clark had never interacted with investigators, but the probes continued elsewhere. Since Clark killed Laura, it was assumed he must also be behind the disappearance of the young girl Michelle. Before we continue, you need to know something. Clark's fingerprint was on Laura's pillow, but they couldn't definitively confirm he was the killer. Why? Because Clark worked as a cleaner in the neighborhood gardens where Laura lived. He was a regular in the area, working daily from morning to evening, while his fingerprint was found in a private space on her pillow in her bedroom. It didn't necessarily prove guilt. There were many plausible explanations. Perhaps he had a personal relationship with Laura, or his silence stemmed from grief over her disappearance, assuming he cared for her. In general, investigations operate on the principle of innocent until proven guilty. This is why Clark was treated gently there. Was no absolute proof he was the killer, especially given his reputation as a kind, simple man with a clean record far removed from crime. However, the case of Michelle, the 6-year-old girl, turned suspicion into certainty. What happened was this: investigators reopened Michelle's file and assigned a team to inspect the home of Clark's. Forensic analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Michelle. Thus, Clark had killed her in his room. Yet, investigators had no prior evidence or information explaining how the crime occurred. When interrogating his brother, he claimed no knowledge of the incident but revealed that Clark had been diagnosed with severe schizophrenia years earlier, stating his current state was predictable. He also shared a cryptic remark: if you want him to confess to anything, bring him Michelle's white teddy bear. Many details tie him to it. She never let go of that bear. And that's exactly what happened. After 8 months of silence, Clark began reacting to investigators, but only through gestures. He performed bizarre actions like yoga poses or praying, until everything changed when he saw the teddy bear. Imagine this: the investigators had one demand: tell us where the bodies are. They were certain he knew, given Michelle's blood in his room, leaving no doubt of his guilt. But they needed the bodies. Clark remained silent until he saw the bear. He then smiled widely, stared at it for half an hour, and descended into intense agitation before collapsing into tears. He confessed, "I killed Laura. I killed Michelle." The investigators rejoiced, thinking he'd finally reveal everything. But tragically, he fell silent again. The probe continued for 5 more months, yet he admitted nothing further. The case closed unsatisfactorily, with Clark sentenced to life imprisonment. But the story doesn't end here. In fact, you could say it's only the beginning. First, you must understand who Hadden Clark is and why he committed these acts. After that, he'll explain how Hadden Irwin Clark ultimately confessed to all his crimes. Hadden Irwin Clark was born on July 31st, 1952, in the city of Troy, part of New York State, in USA. His grandfather was the city's mayor, and the Clark family was exceedingly wealthy and prominent. Hadden's father held a master's degree in administration and a PhD in chemistry, along with 3 revolutionary patents for inventions found in most American households, most notably non-flammable carpeting. In essence, the Clark family epitomized the American dream: cultured, affluent, and seemingly perfect. Yet behind this facade of beauty and reputation lay a deeply dark reality. Hadden's parents were addicted to alcohol and illicit substances. His father claimed he drew inspiration and creative ideas while drunk in ocean. The text firmly dismisses as false. In truth, both parents subjected their 4 children to relentless abuse, beatings, verbal assaults, and various forms of torture. Even more disturbingly, Hadden's mother had desperately wanted her last child to be a girl. When Hadden was born male, she treated him with contempt. She dressed him in girls' clothing, painted his nails, and renamed him Christine. She insisted he was a girl due to a genetic error, and coerced everyone around them to treat him as one. This cruel charade became a cornerstone of his fractured childhood. When he turned 7 years old, do you realize? 7 years old, and they were treating him as if he were a girl since he was a child. If one of his brothers addressed him in a masculine form or considered him male, they would punish him with beatings and torture. The father wasn't aware of all this. The father would beat and torture his children, but at the same time, he wasn't paying attention or understanding what was happening to his son. Anyway, when he turned 7, the father decided to enroll him in school on the very first day. The school found out the whole story from the child through family associations and child protection services. They forced the mother to stop these behaviors, threatening to take her son away if she didn't. This made the mother explode and treat the child even worse, beating and torturing him. She would force him to say, "I am a girl," and threaten to kill him if he didn't comply. She would tell him, If the school finds out what I'm doing to you, I'll kill you so I don't have to deal with you anymore. After a few years of this behavior, the mother was admitted to a mental hospital because she had completely lost her mind. Unfortunately, by that time, the child, Hadden, was completely destroyed. Hadden Clark wasn't gay, nor did he have any deviant tendencies, but he was convinced that he had a feminine soul living in a body that wasn't his. He was consumed by the idea that he was a woman living in a man's body, and this caused him severe personality dissociation. He lived with two identities, male and female. His father, due to the school's threats to take away his son, withdrew him from school and made him continue his education at home, hiding him from society. That's why no one knew the truth about Hadden Clark. It remained a secret known only to his family. When he turned 17, they enrolled him in a prestigious culinary institute, one of the most famous in the world, through money and illicit means. Clark graduated and became a famous chef, but he wasn't accepted for any job because he wasn't normal. He couldn't even boil an egg. After his father passed away, he worked as a gardener because he had loved that kind of work since he was a child. Anyway, in 1974, when Clark was 22 years old, he happened to hear about a legend that said the Aztec people, who lived in Mexico before Christ, used to change their gender through a magical ritual. If you were a man and wanted to become a woman, all you had to do was slaughter a woman, completely drain her blood, drink it, wear her clothes, and sleep in them. The next day, you'd wake up as a woman. Strange. Clark researched the idea and claimed it was true, saying he had seen an ancient manuscript that talked about this concept. Of course, this was a lie and not truth. There were no manuscripts or anything of the sort, but he said this to support his claims. By the way, most of Clark's confessions were written. Didn't always speak. Sometimes he wrote, and other times he drew pictures and expressions resembling the magical manuscript he claimed to have seen. Therefore, he felt he had no other solution but to kill a girl, drink her blood, and wear her clothes in order to transform into a woman. This was very strange because usually, when someone has this kind of disorder, it is accompanied by abnormal behaviors, but Clark was completely normal. The investigations proved that he had relationships with women. Now, you're waiting for me to tell you about each crime, how it happened, and when he confessed. You're right, so I'll tell you now. The first crime occurred in 2003 when Clark confessed that in 1974, he killed a very beautiful 20-year-old girl and hid her body in a tourist city. He told them that one time, while he was working in the garden of one of the tourist resorts, a very beautiful, tall girl with red hair passed by the garden. He followed her, carrying a pickaxe, and walked behind her until they reached an area full of plains. The girl was going to exercise and started running in that area. After making sure the place was empty, he struck her on the back of her head with the pickaxe with all his strength. The blow came at the moment she had bent down to adjust her sports shoe, which is why when she fell to the ground unconscious, there were no signs of bruising. The distance was too close. After that, he dragged her and hid her behind a large tree. He tied a rope tightly around her neck. His goal wasn't to strangle her, but to stop the slight bleeding from her head. He quickly went to fetch a bucket from the place where he worked, slaughtered her, and drained her blood into the bucket. Then he took her clothes and left her body behind the tree for the next day. Confident that no one would find her there, he took his belongings, went home, drank the blood, wore her clothes, and slept. Unfortunately, the experiment didn't work. The next day, he went there with a towel and cleaning supplies. He went to the body and moved it to the location where it was found the following day. As he went, he was sure everything was normal and that no one had noticed anything, and that's exactly what happened. The body was in the same place he had left it. So he carried it and moved it to an open area. He laid the towel on the ground, placed her on it, and then wiped the body with disinfectants and cleaning materials to remove fingerprints. After that, he continued his life as if nothing had happened. As for why he cut off her right and left hands, the man loved fishing. He severed her hands and used the fingers as fishing bait. Despite his confession being very clear and explicit, the police did not connect his confessions to the victim until 20 years later. He killed her in 1974 and confessed to the crime in 2003. But the police didn't understand what he was talking about until 2022, about a year and a half ago. Nearly 50 years later, when they discovered Clark was the one who killed the Lady of the Dunes. By the way, her name turned out to be Ruth Marie Terry, whose husband had reported her missing in 1974. Thus, Clark resolved 3 cases: the disappearance of Ruth in 1974, the Lady of the Dunes case, which turned out to be Ruth, and, most importantly, the exoneration of Ruth's husband, who had been accused of her murder and kidnapping. Now, let's move on to the second crime, the case of the little girl Michelle Dorr, who was kidnapped and killed in 1986. In short, Clark knew that in order to transform, he needed to drink blood again. Therefore, he intended to kidnap and kill Michelle. He maintained a seemingly sweet and normal relationship with her, changing his mind multiple times because he grew fond of the girl. However, due to the schizophrenia he suffered from, he ultimately managed to kidnap and kill her. The incident occurred after her father went inside the house. Remember, I told you she was swimming at home, and her father was present with her but left her alone for a while and went inside the house. At that moment, Clark greeted the girl from a distance and said, "Come, I bought you new toys." The details of this crime are extremely brutal and bloody, and I don't want to describe them. I'll just mention that he strangled her, slit her throat, and repeated the same details as in the first crime. After killing her, he put her in a large bag, took her to a remote area about 12 miles from their house, and buried her there. Then he returned to the vicinity of their house and the place where they lived. As if nothing had happened, he drank the blood and slept, but still, he did not transform into anything. The important thing is, why did the father confess to killing his daughter? Remember, I told you that the father confessed to killing his daughter and then retracted his confession. The reason was that he hated life, was devastated, and wanted to be sentenced to death. He had lost his wife, they were separated, and then he lost his daughter. He was also bankrupt and saw this as the best solution. But when he realized that he would be sentenced to life imprisonment and not die, he retracted his statements. Now, the third crime, the 23-year-old girl named Michelle. As soon as she arrived home, she went to the backyard garden. Clark was working at the house next door, and she humiliated and insulted. The front of the house was monitored by cameras. So he went around to the backyard and entered through the basement door. He went up to her room while she was sleeping, lying on her bed. He attacked her, placed a pillow over her face, and kept stabbing her with a knife until she died. After that, he wrapped her body in a bedsheet and then in a large plastic bag. Before leaving the house, he saw the clothes she was wearing, along with the hat she had put on her head. He placed them in a bag and took them with him. He exited through the basement door, took her. Entering the house, he wiped everything clean and hid all the evidence. Then he left through the basement door as if nothing had happened. Now, the final question I left you with: when did Clark confess? He confessed to the details in 2000. He took the police and investigators to the location where he had buried the bodies. But he had one condition, and of course the police agreed to it. His condition was simple yet strange. He asked for women's underwear. When they asked him whose rings they were and where they came from, he remained silent and didn't say a word. Here, to avoid confusion, you need to know that in 2000, he confessed to Michelle and Laura's cases. In 2003, he confessed to the crime of the Lady of the Dunes. As I told you, each confession corresponds to the order of the crimes, not the order of the confessions. The man remained silent until 2004. That year, a new prisoner arrived at the prison where Clark was being held. This prisoner had done everything you can imagine: theft, fraud, deceit, false claims, drug trafficking, and more. But the most important charge was that he scammed people by pretending to be Jesus Christ. When he entered the prison, he had long hair and a beard, and he acted in front of the prisoners as if he were Jesus Christ. He wanted to deceive them just as he had deceived people outside the prison. Out of all the prisoners, only one person believed him, Clark. Clark went to him and said, "I want forgiveness. I want to confess everything to you." He confessed to 12 murders. The man pretending to be Jesus Christ was so shocked by what he heard that he told Clark, "My friend, even if I were really Jesus Christ, I wouldn't be able to forgive you. No one can forgive you for the things you've done, from what I've heard. It's me who should repent, not you." Imagine what Clark replied. Clark said, "Don't be afraid. There's no need for you to deny that you're Jesus Christ. I can protect you as long as you're in this prison. Don't deny or hide that you're Jesus Christ. I'll protect you." This prisoner went to the prison administration and told them everything Clark had told him. They transferred him to another prison to ensure Clark wouldn't harm him. Investigations into Clark's cases were launched, and to this day, the investigation is still ongoing. Today, he is over 73 years old. Yet, the investigation continues despite the horrific and heinous crimes he committed. However, the media remains interested in him, and no one knows how far the investigations have progressed. Nevertheless, Clark is officially classified as the third most dangerous serial killer in the history of the United States of America. This was our story for today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did Clark's problem start with his mother's behavior, or was he inherently aggressive and criminal from the beginning? And the final question, how could a rational person believe in a legend like the legend of Aztec?